Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this APSN webinar on the international politics of infrastructure and everyday life. My name is May Darwish. I'm Associate Professor of International Relations of the Middle East at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. And my research mainly looks at Middle East international relations and how different questions in the region challenge IR theory and its conceptual depiction of the region. I'm very delighted today to be moderating this event, which is an APSN webinar. And just a disclaimer, this webinar is recorded and it's live streamed, and it will be published eventually on YouTube and other media outlets on APSN websites. APSN is a collaborative scholarly initiative that seeks to support Arab political scientists in the region. It has several activities and resources that seek to support research and teaching outputs in the Arab world. So please do make sure to check out their website, sign up to the newsletter, and also don't hesitate to get in touch with them if you've got any ideas about research and teaching in the Arab world. Today's webinar is mainly on the international politics of infrastructure, which relates to a wider field of study on infrastructure and politics. Infrastructure provides an architecture for the circulation of goods, utilities, resources, but they also facilitate the connection between people, societies, and places across the globe. Briefly speaking, infrastructure are generating the condition in which everyday life is unfolding. Through infrastructure, we can look at how imperial powers connected different regions from the global south to the center, but also nowadays how global world economy is connected and how the global south is increasingly integrated in overarching architecture of the international system. The study of infrastructure has been of interest to philosophers, anthropologists, sociologists, geographers, and it has been an interdisciplinary field of study. But also more recently, more increasingly, political scientists are coming to appreciate the complexity of infrastructure in shaping different political dynamics across the globe. So today's webinar will be mainly talking about port infrastructure, which is part of a larger project on port infrastructure, international politics, and everyday life in the Horn of Africa, a project that's funded by Carnegie Corporation of New York, and it examined trans-regional relationships between the Arabian Gulf and the Horn of Africa through the lens of ports infrastructure. So more precisely, the project examines how Dubai Ports World, which is a leading global port operator and logistic giant, and its investment in moderating ports in the Horn of Africa has generating a lot of political and geopolitical impact on domestic politics, regional politics, and also international politics. So the project is mainly looking at these political contestations that are materializing in through these port infrastructure and exploring how these dynamics are shaping local, national, regional politics in the Horn of Africa. More importantly, infrastructure carry a lot of promise and they raise hope for a better future for people and their everyday life. So the development of ports is not just connected to the political dynamics at the regional and the international level, but it's also very much connected to the everyday life of normal people in these port cities. Today, we will mainly look at some of these ports in the Horn of Africa. More precisely, our speakers will be focusing on 3 port cities: Djibouti, Berbera in Somaliland, and Bosaso in Somalia. And we will also offer some comparative perspective on the topic. So without further delay, allow me to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Amina Shira. She's a geographer and associate researcher at the University of Djibouti. She specializes in East African nomadism, migration, and associated risk. She has extensively published on Djibouti. More importantly, her book on the nomad and the city in Djibouti. Dr. Nasser Ali, lecturer of political science and international relations at the University of Hargeisa. He earned his PhD in peace governance and development from the UN University for Peace in Costa Rica. And he's also author of several book chapters, papers on security, fragility, and recognition in Somaliland. Muhammad Ibrahim is a freelance researcher and a consultant. He has written extensively on conflict, socioeconomic needs, the judicial system, migration, Somali diaspora in particular. He had made significant contribution to commissioned studies and institutional development program for the UNDP, UNICEF, World Bank, European Commission, and the War and Torn Society Project. Last but not least, Professor Jutta Bakuni. She's Professor of Development and Conflict at Durham University. She managed a transitional justice project for the German Civil Peace Service. She also worked as lecturer at the University of Magdeburg and a fellow at the University of Hamburg. Her main research focuses on the causes, actors, and dynamics of violence and war, orders of violence beyond the state. She's also interested in the relation between cities and states and the link between displacement and urbanization. Each speaker will have 8 minutes, which will be followed by 25 minutes of Q&A. So for the audience, if you have any questions, please make sure to write them in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. So without any further delay, to our first speaker, Dr. Amina Shira. The floor is yours.
Thank you, May. Thank you, Hala and Wael. So I will focus on Djibouti port facilities. Djibouti is a very small country located at the northeast of the Horn of Africa. I said it is small because it is only 1 million inhabitants and the size is around 23,000 square meters. But Djibouti location is very strategic and the Djibouti ports are very developed in this region. Djibouti port authorities took advantage of first the Ethiopian-Eritrean war that led Ethiopia to channel most of its imports and exports via Djibouti. So actually 80% of Ethiopian transit passes through Djibouti. Second, it took advantage of urbanization and infrastructure development that has transformed Ethiopia economy in the last 2 decades, prompting significant trade flows and demand for the expansion of Djiboutian ports. Third, it took advantage of the war against terrorism. So after 9/11, Djibouti became a logistical hub for the United States Army and other allied military operations in East Africa. France Army, Spain, Italy, and now China. Fourth, it took advantage of the war against piracy. So Djibouti hosted and hosts naval missions from the USA, Europe, Atalanta, Japan, China, Spain, Italy, and Djibouti became a center for anti-piracy operation in the Gulf of Aden and in the Indian Ocean in order to secure the world maritime trade. So Djibouti is now a logistical hub for trade and military flows in East Africa. So, sorry. A few years ago, DP World was involved into Djibouti port facilities. Because with the return of Ethiopian transit after the war with Eritrea, Djibouti port facilities needed upgrading and modernization so DP World brought the needed investment. In 2000, Djiboutian government signed a management agreement with DP World to manage and upgrade Djibouti port facilities, and it was a win-win partnership that provided to Djibouti the needed investment and for DP World a stepping stone for its expansion into the Horn of Africa. The benefit of this involvement was, so for DP World, Djibouti was a nodal hub in its global network of container transshipment, allowing trade from Asia to Europe to avoid the costly detour through Jebel Ali port. The partnership led for Djibouti to the construction of Horizon Oil Terminal at Dorale, also at the expansion of Djibouti free zone, following the model of Jebel Ali free zone, and in 2009, DP World entered a joint venture with the state-owned Port of Djibouti Authority and invest $400 million into the development of a container terminal in Dorale, the only deep water port in the region. So, but in 2018, Djibouti unilaterally terminated the concession guaranteed to DP World. For this, multiple reasons were identified. Djibouti authorities seem to have reacted to increasingly restrictive conditions imposed by DP World, and that Djibouti was prohibited to establish new ports in its territory unless they were managed by DP World. So at the same time, Djibouti entered into a new partnership with China. And in 2012, in 2013, Djibouti sold it 23.5% of its 66.6% share in Dorale Terminal to China Merchant Holding. And this decision did not sit well with DP World. In 2017, China founded and built the multipurpose port of Dorale, a very modern and developed port. And also this escalates the conflict with DP World. On February 2018, the Djibouti government terminated the contract with DP World through a presidential decree and took over all assets at the port and nationalized it in September 2018. DP World was not very happy with this decision, so it has taken the issue to the international arbitration. The rulings were in favor of DP World, but they were rejected by Djibouti. After that, after the end of the partnership with DP World, Djibouti is now in search of a new role model because Djibouti authorities have promised to transform the city and the country into the lighthouse of the Red Sea by 2035. The last port, the Chinese port, DMP, Dorale Multipurpose Port, has received $580 million investment, and among it was for 12 giant gantry cranes which were deployed on a new 1,200 square meter dock. The DMP, this port, is capable of handling ship carrying up to 15,000 containers and of processing 9 million tons of cargo per year. DMP is considered one of the most efficient deep water ports, 18 meters in the world, and its performance is linked to the railway line that connects the port with the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. Also, China founded and built a new trade zone, which is hosting now around 30 foreign companies 30 foreigner companies. Djibouti also built other ports in the country. So Djibouti had created economic growth with this port development facilities, and since 2000, its annual economic growth is between 4 and 5.5%. But Djibouti at the same time has some challenges despite of this economic growth. It is facing high unemployment and inequalities and poverty, because the tertiary sector that was developed is creating more growth than jobs, and the industrial and agriculture sectors are not very developed. So the impact of the port on the country.
Amina, you've got half a minute.
Half a minute.
30. Okay. Yes, 30 seconds.
Ethiopia is contributing $1 billion annually to Djibouti GDP, and now Djibouti is facing regional competition supported by DP World, who is developing Berbera Port and Bosaso Port, but Djibouti has a long lead over other regional ports in the region, because Djibouti has several ports and very developed ports in the region. Thank you. I will stop there because I finished my time.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you very much. So now we're moving to Nasser to talk about Berbera and Somaliland.
Thank you very much. So let me share my PowerPoint. Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. May, Dr. Yuta, Dr. Amina, Muhammad, and also other colleagues from APSN. I will try to present Somaliland, in particular the Berbera Port. So before I go to my presentation, just I quickly describe what is Somaliland. Somaliland is a former British protectorate in the Horn of Africa. So it gained independence on 26 June 1960, before it joined the Italian colony in Somalia to form the Somali Republic in the Horn of Africa. So if I come to my presentation, I will focus on Berbera Port and the development which is happening in Berbera since DP World started to invest in Berbera. Berbera is one of the oldest or the ancient ports in the Horn of Africa. So it was a strategic port which Somalia government and also Somaliland government was using as a source of income. And basically the economy of Somaliland was based on the revenue which the government generates from the Berbera port and also the Berbera custom, which the Somaliland Ministry of Finance runs. In 2016, the Somaliland government started to think about developing the Berbera port. So it approached different foreign companies. So DP World was one of the port companies, port managing companies, which interested to manage the Berbera port. Finally, the Somaliland government entered into an agreement with the DP World, and basically the two agreed to invest the port, and also DP World were tasked to run the port of Berbera for 30 years. One of the primary objectives of the port from the Somaliland perspective was to modernize the port to compete other regional ports. So the major was, since the Berbera port is a strategic port, since it's not a developed port, Somaliland government opted to develop the infrastructure in the Berbera port. So that was one of the major motives behind the modernization of the port. Also, the DP World was also interested to take the Berbera port because there were a conflict between the Djibouti government and DP World in 2015-16. So DP World also interested to go the next door of Djibouti in order to compete with Djibouti. So that was also the motive behind the DP World to come to Berbera. In addition to the port development, and also DP World and Somaliland government agreed to develop a free zone, which also part of the agreement with the DP World. And also this free zone were modeled as or like the Jabal Ali free zone, which is in Dubai, which also under the management of DP World. In addition to the DP World, I mean the port development and also the construction of the free zone in Berbera, there were also construction of 250 kilometers from Berbera to the border town of Togwajale, which is part of the Berbera development, because since the Berbera port is also one of the ports which is close to Ethiopia, which is a landlocked country, and Somaliland government and DP will also agreed to construct that road which is connecting the Berbera port to the border town of Togwajale. And basically the construction of the corridor or the 250 kilometers is not coming from the DP World, but also it is a funding which is coming from Abu Dhabi Development Fund. So basically this fund or the construction of the corridor is connected to the renovation of the Berbera port for military purpose, which UAE government started to construct in 2017, 18, and 19. So the corridor was part of that, was part of Berbera military airport. Now the construction of the corridor between Berbera and Hargeisa is close to end, and basically the Somaliland government is planning to inaugurate the corridor within the coming few months. And what the Berbera port development contributes to the citizens of Somaliland, or in particular to the residents of Berbera, and basically the development of Berbera port, the corridor, and also the renovation of the Berbera airport contributed to the life of the Berbera residents. For example, DP World started to help Berbera Water Agency, and so it contributed to the expansion of the Berbera water supply system. And also they invested in the health sector, where they rehabilitated and also reconstructed other new health facilities in Berbera. Also, they helped the energy sector in Berbera, so they also intervened in that sector. And also they created job opportunities for the Berbera citizens, which also transforming the lives of the Berbera residents. When we see the development of the Berbera port and also Berbera corridor, it's obvious that it has an impact on regional political dynamics. And for example, when the DP World and Somaliland government agreed to develop the Berbera port, and the major potential market for Berbera was Ethiopia. Considering that Ethiopia is the potential market for Berbera, DP World and Somaliland government, they agreed to give 19% for Ethiopia. This move created some contention between the Somaliland citizens, where some Somaliland citizens see the 90% for Ethiopia as a domination or the expansion of Ethiopia's domination over the Somaliland territory, where other citizens see as an opportunity to give Berbera 19% to Ethiopia, which can increase the use of Ethiopia to the Berbera airport. However, in June this year, Somaliland government, they stated that Ethiopia has lost the 19% for some reasons which the Somaliland government mentioned. How in this project, the port infrastructure is relevant to the real politics in the Horn of Africa. This project is basically answering the growing interrelations between the Horn of Africa and the Middle Eastern countries. And the project also is focusing on the area which the Berbera port development also intervened, for example, health sector, water and electricity. And also, as I mentioned earlier, Ethiopia wants to use the Berbera port. And if you see the growth and transformation plan of Ethiopia, they have a plan to shift around 30% of its import-export activities to Berbera. Also, the outcome we are expecting.
Nasser, your time is almost up, so if you can conclude this now.
Okay, thank you.
You can finish the sentence if you want to.
Okay, so the outcome is expected from this also project is to inform the policy and the decision making of Somaliland. So thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Nasser. Now moving to our third speaker, Mr. Muhammad Ibrahim.
Okay, I will just say hi to everyone, the panel, the organizers and the participants. First, I want to start to introduce the port of City of Bosaso. The city is located at the northern eastern corner of Somalia, and right now is known as the Puntland Federal Member of State of Somalia. Unlike Somaliland, Puntland is part of the federal government of Somalia. Though the relationship between Somalia and Puntland has been very challenging. They have their own differences and disagreements. And if you look at how the port looks currently, in terms of size, the infrastructure and the facility of the port is very small when you compare to other ports in the region, including Djibouti and Berbera. The port only handles 1 or 2 small ships of 6,000 tons and several number of what you call wooden vessels called dhows. So the port has no space for container ships. The port was built in mid-80s and it was completed. I mean, the first phase of the port was completed when the central government of Somaliland has collapsed. When the central government of Somalia has collapsed in 1991. And the civil war that has ensued after the collapse of the government led to the construction of the port has stopped, and also led to the evacuation of the staff and the equipment of the construction company. When it comes to Bosaso city, and once the central government has collapsed, there was a violence in the southern of Somalia. Bosaso has remained relatively very peaceful during that time. So many people in the south and other regions in Somalia has come to Bosaso to rebuild their lives and businesses. And the people who was really coming to Bosaso mainly were people from the region, as well as others from the other regions who were coming to Bosaso. After that, immediately after that, Bosaso has become a major hub for trade, particularly for export and import, livestock export, as well as consumer goods imports, linking the port to all regions of Somalia and Eastern Ethiopia. However, in 2010, the port activity in terms of trade activities has declined when you compare to other ports in the region. There are several reasons for that. The first reason was there was a security deterioration in the city due to the presence of Al-Shabaab. Shabaab is an Islamic insurgent who has an affiliation with Al-Qaeda. There has been improvement in the southern regions in terms of security and the reopening of ports of Mogadishu and Kismayo. The third reason was the use of containerization of ships. In Mogadishu and Berbera, they have the facilities for terminals for container shipping, and Bosaso does not have those facilities. Finally, there has not been a major investment in the port since it was constructed in the 90s. There was a hope for Bosaso to get investment, and because of that, they had concession agreement with DP World. They had a concession agreement in 2017, following the one DP World had in Somaliland, Berbera. The concession agreement was almost 30 years, worth 363 million, including the investment was to expand the port and improve the facility. However, DP was not the direct managing. They were not the one who managing the port. They were managing it through their subsidiary known as P&O. As soon as the P&O came to Bosaso and began to implement the concession agreement, they faced a lot of challenges to move on. The first challenge came from local resistance, because due to the secrecy, lack of transparency, in the agreement, people felt that the agreement was not shared with the public. It was not a very transparent process. So there was a really internal resistance to the agreement. And secondly, there was a security challenge in the Syria, as I mentioned before, and that led in 2018 the killing of the P&O manager in Bosaso, and then that forced DP World staff to retreat from Bosaso. Also, there was another challenge. Major challenge was that there was unmet obligation on both sides. Because of that, the two sides were in disputes since 2018. They eventually negotiated a new agreement in 2022. As a result of that, DP World assumed directly the management of the port in July 2022. After being away for more than 2 years. The government and the public in the region right now, they feel they are more hopeful that the current arrangement will be much better than the first one, and there's hope that DP World will begin do their work and do the implementation fully. Still, but there's a multiple challenges still lay ahead. The security challenge is there. Probably there's also internal division could also come back. Also, UAE has had also a security relationship with Bosaso Port, and still it maintains that relationship. One reason why DP World is interested in the port is therefore likely to be the location as well as the geo-military purposes, not just only for geo-economic purposes. The port is usually used by small scale and informal trades. The port is really a major hub for dhows, small wooden vessels, and small scale bulk carriers. In that respect, the port has makes the port to have links with the Arabian Peninsula and the Arabian Gulf. Particularly goods arriving from other countries in containers, are shipped to this Arabian Gulf ports and then pre-shipped back to Bosaso, since Bosaso has no terminal containers. Similarly to other ports in the region, Bosaso has steady links to Ethiopia. Bosaso port, though its strategic position and port infrastructure is not comparable to Berbera and Djibouti. However, the people and the government in the region are trying to increase their share of trade to Ethiopia. Basically, Puntland has two coastlines. One is in the Indian Ocean, one is in the Red Sea. There's a private initiative to build a port in the ocean side to increase the share of Puntland's export to Ethiopia. To come back to the challenges, if I just mentioned the challenges, that the prospect is that this will increase Puntland's share. If they modernize the port, it will increase the Puntland's share in trades in the region. But the other challenge remains that there's no proper oversight of the implementation of the concession agreement. As I mentioned, the port usually are used many people from the informal sector. If you formalize the trade and the process in the port, that could harm the informal sector, which really employs a lot of people in the city of Bosaso, and that could also create resistance from these people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, very much. And moving now to Professor Jutta Bakuni.
Yeah, thank you very much, May. I will use the time to raise some comparative points from the presentations, but also to share some more critical thoughts and general questions that will guide our further studies. But before I do that, I would like to highlight the three contributions our research aims at, albeit I have to acknowledge that much of it is still work in progress. First, we use port infrastructures as a prism to comparatively study how international relations materialize. The politics of materials usually focuses on the local, the city, the port, for example, or on the global, as in global logistics, global supply chains, capitalism more widely. Our focus is different in that the international dimensions, the international negotiations, financing agreements, international competitions and conflicts that are visible in the port developments in the Horn are our focus, and how they shape how the ports are built and managed. I think that came clearly through in the presentations. Second, we also look in the way in which international relations and their material manifestations are impacting the everyday lives of people in the region. We connect the international with the everyday, something that in my view IR does too little. We often study big politics and forget to explore the impact of big politics on small people's lives. So this part of the project is not very far yet. Third, the third contribution is that we move from the study of relations in the global north to the south, and here to places where northern hegemons are not the only and not even the most important players. We look into South-South relations and counter the northern focus that continues to dominate much of IR theorizing and IR empirics. In contrast, we study a region that can easily be characterized as at the far margins of the international systems, of the international system in singular. The countries in the Horn share low positions in nearly all development indices. They are, in contrast, often on top of indices that deal with insecurity, violence, displacement, or failure more general.
Jutta, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There is a little bit of background noise. It's something as if it seems, I don't know.
It might be my watch.
Like, sorry, I think it stopped now.
Yeah, because I stopped the watch. Now you have to give me signs then. Sorry, okay, I didn't know it's so loud. Okay, so we look at countries in the Horn of Africa that share low positions in all development indexes. which for our research means that the impact of infrastructural developments are much more directly visible and much more pronounced. So we think we can really learn from looking into that. But why do we think port developments are important at all? What do they do? Port developments aim at enhancing the connection between places, territories, and people. That's what infrastructural development more generally provides. It provides linkages, nodes, corridors, pipelines, cables, and it increases connectivity. Such linkages and connections are often seen as prerequisite for economic development, as they provide access to global networks of extraction, production, supply, and consumption. They are supposed to stimulate economic growth and with it, so the argument goes further, improves the livelihood of people. But is this indeed the case? The 3 countries under focus also articulate this view very clearly in their port modernization programs. They also acknowledge that port developments alone are not sufficient in this respect and require further infrastructural engagement, train lines, transport corridors, roads, all of it currently in the making, not just in the Horn of Africa, but across Africa in Asia. In Somaliland, this infrastructural development, and I think Nasir made that very clear, is embedded in a lot of optimism and in large aspirations. However, we can also look at the example of Djibouti, which is a success story in many ways. We can see that port modernization, economic growth, as Amina showed, do not automatically bring about prosperity and social well-being for all. Djibouti has among the highest inequality rates in the region, in the Horn of Africa, with extreme poverty, which means people living under $1.9 a day, ranging at nearly 20%. And middle income poverty, that means people living under $3.20 a day, nearly at 40%. That means nearly half of the people in Djibouti live in poverty. There is no automatism that economic growth leads to prosperity for all. Distribution of wealth is not a technical issue, but a political challenge. When we compare the port and corridor developments, and I wish we could have shown some photos, we see how ports, corridors, and logistics insert a standardized calculative logic on space. The modern port spaces look pretty similar, Djibouti or Berbera. They differ in size. They have all docking stations, free zone, big cranes, lots of containers. We also saw in the Horn of Africa that infrastructural connections are not random. They don't just randomly connect people and places. In the Horn, they have one destination, that is Ethiopia. Djibouti currently handles over 80% of Ethiopia's overseas import export. Somaliland wants a share of this and therefore tried to get Ethiopia to take in turn a 19% share in the port. Somaliland literally wanted the buy-in of Ethiopia and its modernization plans. Ethiopia, however, did not buy in, and this is risky for Somaliland, and it is risky for DP World. Without Ethiopia, the port may not be needed. Bosaso too targets Ethiopia. The country seems big enough. But then there is also Mogadishu and Kismayo in the south of Somalia, not to forget Lamu, the Lapsat corridor, Mombasa and Kenya. Is Ethiopia big enough for all the corridors that want to tap into its economy? We don't know. We will continue to observe what will happen with the corridors. Important from our perspective is also that the ports are transit points. The countries themselves, Djibouti, Somaliland, Somalia, have no extraction or production going on that is of significant interest to global players. Somaliland produces livestock in a large amount, which is especially used in Saudi Arabia. But by no means would that require a container terminal or modern cranes. There's a risk involved in that. It is the risk that the highways to the port remain just that. Highways, nodes of speedy transport across a country that is otherwise relatively deserted and disconnected. Again, Djibouti springs to our mind. So last question, who pays the price? Or maybe more important, what is the price of this infrastructural development? Multilateral institutions acknowledge that most infrastructures require sunk capital. That means investment into fixes that do not bring immediate returns. This sunk capital is often provided by the state, and often through loans and grants, some of which indebt the countries in which infrastructures are built for decades to come. Kenya currently provides a real good example. The concessions in the port developments in the Horn of Africa are a different model. DP World has a 30 years lease in Berbera, in a country that is itself only 30 years old. In the model, however, DP World bears the economic risk, not Somaliland, it's DP World. DP World also gets the profits if it is successful. What that will mean for Somaliland remains to be seen, as the little income the country has stems predominantly from the port. Overall, the deals and concessions are quite intransparent. Parts are kept secret, and the involved actors and different agreements are very difficult to disentangle for outsiders, but also for citizens. What does it politically mean to be so economically dependent on Ethiopia? There is a certain irony in that for Bosaso/Puntland and Berbera/Somaliland, the port developments are about their political independence. In Somaliland, independence, and in Bosaso, autonomy from Somalia. But in the same time, this independence risks another dependence from a neighbor state, Ethiopia, and a logistics company, DP World. However, not to end on a negative side, the story of Djibouti also shows that the power in the logistics and port game is not only one-sided. Djibouti resisted the arm twisting by DP World and what it experienced as interference in their own sovereignty. The host states can leverage power even if this power mainly builds on the lack of international law enforcement, as did Djibouti when it clearly breached its agreement with DP World. Life continues, port war continues, trade continues, supply chains don't mind. Nothing much happened at all. So there is power in the host states as well. I end on that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jutta, very much for these comparative thoughts. And now I would invite our audience to put their questions in the Q&A box, and we'll start the Q&A session immediately. So we have the first question from Samia. Djibouti suffers from many problems such as poverty, unemployment, and a harsh climate. We know that the country has opened its doors to foreign investment. However, we have not witnessed the development of infrastructure. Is the problem in the laws, the quality of investment, or the rivalry of competition in the region? Samia bin Yahya from Algeria. Thank you, Samia. Amina, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, May.
Amina, we cannot see you. Your camera's off.
Yahya. Yes, Djibouti create economic growth, but not so much. It is not good managed or shared, or we have a lot of poverty. What can I add about this? The problem is the management, I think. We have some other problems. Good governance is not very developed, so this is the problem, I think. We create a lot of economic growth, but it's not well shared and well managed, I think.
Thank you, Amina.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I mean, in the meantime, waiting for other questions, I would like to ask the panelists to reflect on one of the questions that Jutta raised, especially on the situation with Ethiopia, and to what extent the situation in Ethiopia has particularly an impact on the projects in each of the port cities. So maybe starting with Nasser this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. May. And basically, both countries in the region, particularly in Djibouti and Somaliland, mostly they have they want to benefit the potential market in Ethiopia. So both Berbera and Djibouti, they are targeting to materialize the potential market in Ethiopia, as I mentioned earlier. And in Somaliland, for example, mostly the government is trying to get its share in Ethiopia. And for example, when the war broke out in Ethiopia and TPLF was trying to block the only corridor which comes to Ethiopia from Djibouti, mostly the transport, including the train and also the ground truck, is mostly they stuck at some where in between Djibouti border and Ethiopia. So mostly Ethiopia realized that they have a need to get other alternatives to get. So, and even before the conflict, they were keeping in mind that Berbera is a viable option, and so still they are having in mind to materialize the potential and position of Berbera. Still, there is ongoing debate between Somaliland and Ethiopia, apart from the 19% which the Somaliland government stated before 3 months that it is invalid. There's ongoing negotiations between Ethiopia and Somaliland on trade, transit, and also they want to agree some sort of agreement regarding the customs and how Somaliland business people can benefit Ethiopian market, how the Somaliland transporters or truck owners can benefit the Ethiopian market. So still there's ongoing debate between Somaliland and Ethiopian government. And still they didn't finish that negotiations. And basically the development of the corridor and also the expansion of the port and the construction of the free zone in Berbera is still going on. So, and the government of Somaliland, basically they want to finish the agreement on trade, transit, and also transport before the end of the project of Berbera, the completion of the free zone and also the port and the corridor.
Thank you, Nasser. Mohammed, would you like to reflect as well on the situation in Ethiopia?
I think the risk she mentioned is right now it's going on in Somalia, between Somalia and Ethiopia. Ethiopia is really locked in a very civil war. Their currency is devalued day by day. It's very unstable. I think the volume of goods between Somalia and Somalia, but also in Ethiopia, is becoming less. So I think the risk you mentioned is on the horizon. Really, it's really. I was in Tokwajale a couple of days. I spent 4 days in Tokwajale. Is the main hub between Somalia and Ethiopia. People are feeling the pain because the currency of Ethiopia currency is really, it gets devalued day by day. Day by day. Now the irony that the Somaliland currency is much stronger than the Ethiopian currency, but the transaction takes in Ethiopian birr, So really, even in Bosa, everywhere in Somalia, I mean, anybody who's connected with Ethiopia right now, they're feeling the pain. It's unstable. The government has no currency. The Ethiopian government has no currency really, and there's no import and export going on in Ethiopia. So now the risks she mentioned that we laying all our basket in Ethiopia, really it's coming in. It's really, you can feel that. I mean, right now is a question that it's a question that everybody has to really think about that. Ethiopia as being the main beneficiary and be the target, in Somali society, really, in terms of trade. So now Ethiopia really is suffering. Unless there is a negotiation in Ethiopia, the war is now again one is going on right now in a full-fledged. So I think the risk she mentioned really is on the horizon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. So we have 2 more questions from the audience. The first question from Salima. Thank you very much for all the participants and organizers. My question is about the Profit Abu Dhabi Fund or the Gulf countries. I think she also means DP World are getting by investing in the infrastructure of the region. Maybe Jutta, you would like to reflect a little bit on that?
Yes, happy to do so. I mean, first of all, what do they get by running ports? You know that DP World is not only running ports in Africa, they run ports in Europe, they run ports in America, in the US, they run ports, actually very little. They only start now in Africa, at least to my knowledge. But what do they get? They get access to a huge, relatively untapped African market. And that's what they try. They try to, that's what I think they try. They try to monopolize the logistics, which is the lifeblood of capitalism nowadays. It's all about supply chains. It's all about fast and speed moving of resources needed and goods needed. And they try to have, are one of the first or the main suppliers of that. Their profit is for sure not immediate. Infrastructures require huge investments, and in Djibouti they really lost. I mean, they invested in the port development in Djibouti. Amina can, I think, confirm that. And then Djibouti kicks them out in all breaches of international law of contracts. And while Djibouti is supposed to pay them compensation for that, Djibouti just doesn't. And there is no way to enforce it. At least there's no way so far to enforce it. I see there's a question on sanctions. There could be launched sanctions, but nobody has an interest to cut Djibouti and Ethiopia off the international market, I think. So I think they...
Jutta, since you mentioned the second question of Shukri, could you also elaborate that he basically talks about international competition? What is the international competition and the sanction issues?
Yeah, I don't know that sanctions could be enforced if the international community, the UN, the Security Council would say we need to enforce sanctions on trade agreements, which they usually don't. At least to my knowledge, they don't. And may know that better if she wants to add. She's not an IR scholar. So if a country doesn't comply with these regulations, then nothing much happens. And Djibouti, I think, shows that there is not much happening since they kicked out. I mean, they still have all the investments of DP World. They built the port. And now I'm not so sorry for DP World either, because they have a lot of investments in other countries, and I'm sure they can afford to be kicked out of the small Djibouti. But they want to stay a global player. They are one of the major global players in port developments and logistics. And they want to expand, and they are clever enough to go on the African market. I think it's a large market, and it will come. And European powers were too slow to do it, so others have taken over. What was the second question? What is the competition? Yeah, in order to get access to these ports, there were several companies tried, and several countries tried. I don't know if you know. Along the Indian Ocean, in Somalia, there's, for example, Turkey, who runs the port in Mogadishu for the Somali government, which means Turkey runs it, not the Somali government. There are other players who try to get hold of the ports at the Gulf of Aden to what maybe also military power, but I'm not so sure anymore if this is a crucial point. So. A lot of international conflicts is going on of who has access to the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean, and who controls the port, which connect the rest of the world to Africa, at least through the sea road to the east of Africa.
Yeah, thank you, Jutta.
Yeah.
We have another question for Somaliland from Sana. My question is related to the status of Somaliland on global chessboard, and does this constitute an obstacle for the investment in Somaliland and the impact of this one on the region? So Nasser, would you like to answer that question?
Thank you very much. I think the non-recognition status of Somaliland mostly affects Somaliland. Because the country is unrecognized, it does not qualify multilateral investment, foreign direct investment. So this non-recognition status mostly affects the infrastructure development of Somaliland. But when DP World came to Somaliland, there is some change which is coming. And one of the reasons is Somaliland government opted to develop the Berbera port, and give foreign company was just to make DP well as a benchmark, which can attract the other foreign companies to come to Somaliland and invest. So Somaliland want to use DP well as a gateway to the other international companies to come to Somaliland. If I go to the second question, which is mostly related to the development of the infrastructure in the Horn of Africa, yes, there is a competition between the Chinese and the United States of America. And Somaliland is mostly now one of the hot spots in the region. And basically, the Chinese are in Djibouti. The American government, they have a military base in Djibouti, and also the Chinese, they have a military base in Djibouti, and also they are running the Dorale port in Djibouti. So basically, now Somaliland became one of the countries in the Horn of Africa which does not have which China does not have any influence. And Somaliland, they invited Taiwan to come to Somaliland. And now Taiwan, they have a presence here in Somaliland. And you can see how now the Somaliland and China relations is. The Chinese are here. And Americans mostly, they didn't officially declare that they have, they want to establish a military base in Berbera, but the symptoms and the signs which is happening is indicating that the US government interested to come to the Berbera airport. And before state collapse in Somalia in early 1980s and late 1980s, the US government was using the Berbera airport as a military base. So now the US want to revive that issue.
Nasser, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you because we've got more questions, and I want Amina as well to comment on the question of the US and China. So we'll come back to you. So Amina, would you like to also reflect on the US and China and how it affects the infrastructure projects in Djibouti?
So Djibouti is welcoming 7 military bases, foreign military bases. First, French military base, American military base, Italian one, Spain, China, and lastly, China. So all those military armies are here, and we have no problem. The American were not very happy when Djibouti decided to give a military base to China, but I think now we don't have a big issue with the cohabitation of all those military bases. But China is mostly involved in the economic development and in the infrastructure constructions. They built the biggest port of Djibouti, Dorale multi-purpose port. They also constructed the railway line between Djibouti and Addis Ababa, which is the last corridor between Ethiopia and Djibouti. We have 3 road corridor and 1 railway line between Djibouti and Ethiopia. So it's not a big issue, but I don't know, it can become bad. But now it's okay. Djibouti is trying to diversify its partnerships. So they have the ports, but now Ethiopia is having some issues with the war with the Tigray, with the COVID, and so Djibouti try to rely on the military bases rent, and Djibouti is now trying to diversify its partnerships. Lastly, they signed an agreement with South Sudan, and South Sudan is going to build here a port for itself in Djibouti.
Okay, thank you, Amina. Because we have a last question and we have to finish in a few minutes. So final question from Eric to Mohammed and Nasser. Do you feel that the degree of transparency in the port process and revenue collection is where it needs to be to ensure revenue collection? Mohammed, would you like to answer this on revenue collection question?
I think there are two revenue streams. You know, one is the customs, and one is the port handling charges. You know, so the DPO deals with port handling charges, and I think there's a lack of a strong oversight in terms of these dealings. You know, so I think the relationship between DP World and the government side is lopsided. You know, DP World is very strong, and the government side, in terms of management and skills, in terms of structure, in terms of oversight in the parliament, in the government, public, publishing the information. I think that's very lacking. So, and people are buying that in terms of the development, you know, because there is a health improvement, there is a infrastructure in health. So they're buying in terms of the transparency and oversight, you know, they are overlooking that because there is an improvement in the port, management as well. So that I think, but later on, I think that this is going to be a question that how how the oversight and really holding this, knowing the information publicly is going to come back sometimes.
Thank you, Mohammed. Nasser, would you like to comment on this one very briefly?
Yeah, thank you. I think Mohammed mentioned the most important point is the issue of transparency is very important. Basically, Somaliland was dependent on the collection of the revenues from the Berbera custom, which was the major source of the Somaliland economy. So there's a need to have transparent institutions in order to generate a lot of revenue from the customs of Somaliland. Not only the Berbera custom, but also other customs of Somaliland. They need transparent institutions. So it is very important to have transparency when it comes to the revenue collection. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Nasser, very much. Just one final question for Amina on, do you feel that the international community is turning a blind eye to the limited civic space in Djibouti? So this is just a final question on the situation or the military domination in Djibouti and its relationship to the project of infrastructure.
Yes, I think I talked about the Djibouti importance in the war against terrorism and piracy. So I think Djibouti is very, very important for the international community. So I think they always turn a blind eye on some internal issues. It's not easy to talk about politics, so yeah. I will stop
Thank you,
there.
Amina. Yeah. Thank you, Amina, very much. And I would like to thank all the panelists for their contribution and very interesting discussion. And thank you for the audience for the very engaging questions. And I look forward to seeing you again in another APSN webinar. And thank you very much for the APSN team for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
We just leave now. Yeah.